The most interesting part of the story is how DigiCash goes by the wayside. It's sold on the courthouse steps in 1998. You know who buys it? A guy named Naveen Jan. You know anything about Naveen Jan? Because we're getting ready to tie the General Groves bow in a knot here so you can see where it comes. Naveen Jan is part of a company named Infosys. Infosys was Google before Google was Google.
Right.
Okay? And they also are tied into search, surveillance, and algorithms. They're also tied to General Groves' friends in Silicon Valley. He knows that this is ultimately tied to what Meyer Lansky's plan is. Do you know why? You know where Naveen Jan comes from? India. And when he comes over, guess who's the first company he works for? Burroughs. Remember who Burroughs was? That merged with Remington Rand.
Yeah.
So he knew that the keys to General Groves' plan about setting up a private bank with peer-to-peer cash flows was buried in what Sham was working in. But since it was being sold at the courthouse steps, he bought it all. But he had no idea how to deal with it. So who did Jan wind up working for later? Microsoft. Believe it or not, Bill Gates almost tried in 1994 to buy DigiCash because he also knew. Who else was involved in all this? Peter Thiel and the PayPal mafia, Elon Musk. They knew about this as well to this very day. But Jan takes it, goes through the wind, and then magically this young kid shows up who's a PhD candidate of David Sham's in the Netherlands. You know what his name is? Len Sassaman. Len Sassaman is Satoshi Nakamoto. Because what does he do? He realizes immediately what Sham did and what Adam Back didn't realize. Everybody in Bitcoin gives Adam Back deference like he's the Pope. Uncle Jack's the only guy that doesn't. Because Adam Back's part is this big. Turns out when Sassaman looks at it, do you know what his claim to fame was? At 18 years old, he gets tied into building the TCP IP network for Tor and the dark web. Okay?
Yeah.
This is ultimately where Ross is going to cut his teeth. He does all the basic work for this, and he realizes through those shuffling networks and how they work that timestamping is the single most important part of this mechanism. And what does he do? 3 parts in the white paper. What did I say from Bitcoin Prague? The thing that struck me when Jack Dorsey handed me the white paper the first time. I said, this is just like circadian biology. It's timestamping, and it turns out it doesn't work with quantum time, not time relativity. It's actually Newtonian time. It rejects seconds, hours, and minutes for 10 minutes, 10-minute blocks. And the reason why he had to do that is because what he learned in Tor is that in order to make it work, you had a timestamp to make things connect. That's exactly what happens in us. You got it. So he's the one that puts the entire system together. And then magically what happens? Where does this tie in?
And so he was then marrying Adam Back's proof of work to DigiCash.
Correct.
And applying
timestamping is
part of proof of work though, right?
It is, but not the way Sassaman does it.
Okay.
And the key is the most important part of Bitcoin isn't the proof of work mechanism. It's the timestamp.
Right.
Because guess what? If time is relative, you can't have an immutable ledger.
The fact that time can't have an immutable ledger without the expenditure of energy.
Correct.
They're both necessary.
But remember, that's entropy. And entropy, everything that deals with a clock, all clocks are is flow meters of entropy. That's the brilliance of Len Sassaman. He figures that out, comes up with the white paper, and has a solution. The reason why...
It's a universal flow meter for entropy.
You got it. That's exactly what it is. And see, it made sense to me because here I am as the mitochondriac, which is the time machine in us. Bitcoin is the time machine in money. And the craziest part of the story is if it doesn't go open source and Sassaman isn't the PhD candidate of Sham in Amsterdam or in Belgium, dude, this confluence never happens. And here's where it crashes back on me. How does Sassaman get taken out? Why does it make sense why he fell off the face of the earth? At 18 years old, since he's a tech abuser like Dorsey was, he gets horrible depression. The depression goes into other mental illness. He develops a functional neurologic deficit. That functional neurologic deficit is why he kills himself. So in other words, non-native EMF, the stuff that you asked me about earlier, this story is tied to Bitcoin. So now when you ask me the story of Hal Finney, do you understand why I went to Bitcoin Prague and I said the things I said? Why? Because my understanding of Bitcoin is radically different than Saylor's, radically different than yours, radically different than everybody else. Why? Because it's the timing. That's the key. And if you know anything about physics, which I know Saylor does, but here's the thing that you and Saylor never talked about in your big time controls the flow of energy over matter.
Yeah.
Bitcoin is all about time.
Well, then it's power, right? It's
You got
energy
it.
per unit time.
Right.
So yeah, which money is power.
Correct.
So no, that's fucking fantastic. So how do you get the evidence to support that conclusion? I mean, obviously you've painted a very brilliant narrative. Like, where did you find that?
How
did you figure that out?
All the homework that I did chasing down the Lansky story.
And so
why? Because this whole thing was tied.
Yeah.
Again, because we didn't get into this so far on the podcast. All of this was tied to my belief as a young man, young resident, that the United States doesn't get back on its feet until we put the people who killed JFK in jail.
Right.
And it turns out that Lansky and the Bitcoin story
Right.
crash into this way. And